Next up, All In, the Women's Sports Investment Era, moderated by Haley Rosen, founder and CEO, Just Women's Sports.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Haley Rosen. I'm the founder and CEO of Just Women's Sports. I'm really excited to be here today moderating this awesome panel. This is the Women's Sports Investment Era panel. Today, I'm joined by three incredible builders in the space. First, we have Frank Arthofer, president of OneTeam Partners, where he leads revenue generation, marketing, content, and IP partnerships. He previously held executive roles at Formula One and ESPN. Welcome, Frank. Next up, we have Carmen Bona, Angel City FC's first president of business operations. There, she leads ACFC's business functions, driving revenue growth and operational excellence. And speaking of Angel City, last but not least, we have Nortman, managing partner of Monarch Collective, the first investment platform exclusively dedicated to investing in women's sports. She's also a co-founder of Angel City FC. Welcome, everyone. Let's dive right in. Frank, I'm going to start with you, but if anyone else on the panel wants to jump in, feel free. From where you sit at OneTeam, how have you seen the perception of commercial value in women's sports shift in the last few years?
It's not lost on me that as the only man on the panel talking about women's sports, I'm kicking us off. So thank you, Haley, and thanks for putting this together. I think, look, what we're seeing is an enormous enthusiasm from brands to enter the women's sports space, but I would say a still emerging kind of understanding of how to best play. I think the Forbes study is something to the effect of 5% of the Fortune 500 brands invest in women's sports, and 25% of those do so in men's. And so there's a lot of white space, and it's still early days. What we try to, thought partner with from a brand perspective is men's and women's sports are different. The way you think about investment needs to be different. The way you activate should be different. Men's audiences are much more scaled, but on the other hand, what we're seeing on the women's side is both engagement and intent to purchase is more correlated with the investment that brands are making. You're seeing fans and consumers really step up and want to support the brands that are sponsoring their favorite athletes, their favorite teams. I think, people sort of attribute this to purpose-driven marketing. I actually don't see it that way. I think this is good business. It's more measurable ROI. You're actually seeing the brands drive higher intent to purchase by playing in women's sports and with women's athletes than at times they are in men's on a like-for-like basis. And, that's what all marketers should be after.
Yeah, Carmen, I'm curious for you. Angel City has become the blueprint for building a commercially viable women's sports franchise. From where you sit, what is actually driving revenue right now, and what gets overhyped in headlines?
When you look at the revenue streams at the local level, it's sort of the three obvious ones: sponsorships, ticketing, and merch. And for each one of them, there's this dual story of sort of a day one and mission-aligned set of fans and sponsors, as well as just new brands and fans that are coming in just because it's good business, just because it's good sports. So if you think about sponsorships, again, we have some people that have been with us from the beginning and that really see women's sports as an extremely differentiated asset, really see Angel City as a very unique mission-driven organization that they want to be associated with, and we're going to continue having more and more of those brand partners that see that value, but at the same time we'll see some of the ones that Frank was referring to, which is just ROI-driven. They compare you to a men's team, to a men's sport, and they see that is good business, so that drives growth, obviously. And on the ticketing and merch side, from a fan perspective, it's similar, right? You'll have day one fans that really had an extremely strong association with your team, but you also have casual fans, and people are coming into women's sports for the first time and looking for a team to support and associate with, and that will drive a lot of growth. And then at the league level, obviously, as you see more of these proof points, the media rights deal and the expansion fees start catching up to the commercial potential and reflecting it. So you get all these factors as sort of catalyst of growth at the same time, and that's why it's such an exciting time to be in women's sports.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that we're really starting to see the ROI in women's sports, and I think that's a massive shift that brands and sort of different properties are getting behind. Kara, for you, you've said women's sports are one of the last undervalued assets in sports and entertainment. Is that still true today? And if so, what needs to happen to start growing these valuations?
Well, the world has changed a lot, perhaps, since I said that. It's one of the things I love about women's sports is we all get a chance to meet our bias, right? And when we started Monarch, I remember a number of investors said, well, we believe in women's soccer now because of Angel City, but we don't believe in women's basketball. And we got all the different tropes around, dunking and this and that. And then you go to your first Liberty game, right? Or people attribute it to Caitlin Clark, but numbers are up across the board, and you have multiple generational players coming. So I do think and of course now basketball is, of course it's basketball, but will that ever happen with, pick your next sport? I do think there's sort of like an arbitrage on focus, is what I would say. I used to say there was an arbitrage on sexism, but now I think there's an arbitrage on focus, in that it is very hard to be a great sports operator, and it is very hard to be a great sports investor. It's very hard to be great at anything, I think. And it's hard to get into the best assets as an investor. And then once you do, if you're just structuring, I think from a financial standpoint in a market where you have maybe 6 or 7 teams that are generating more than 10 million in revenue, plenty of people have money, and sort of like, how are you going to be a part of the story? Like, what is authentically yours to do and yours not to do? So I do think that there's still, it's probably the fastest growing asset class, right? The entire market for women's sports, Deloitte just came out with their new numbers, is $2.4 billion. The men's market is estimated to be $500 billion. So, but how you actually get in and who is going to disproportionately drive that growth, I don't think enough people are probably really deeply focused on it and why they have a seat at the table or should have a seat at the table.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. We talk a lot about the opportunity in women's sports and how it's growing, but it's still smaller than men's sports. For the whole panel, what do we think is that unlock? What is needed over the next 2 to 3 years to really sort of bridge that gap and make this industry what we all think it can be?
I'm always happy to talk, Haley. Do you want me to
go? Go. It's yours.
Julie can tell you that. There's a lot of different unlocks. I think you still have a ton of unlock so we look at team level and league level, and at Monarch we only invest in the most mature parts of the sports ecosystem, but where we really think we can come in and be a true partner to the control owner and drive those team level revenues because of the resources we have around the table. So, what if you look at ticketing, dynamic pricing, packages, collaborations, activations in stadium. I was just reading the Sportico article on Real Madrid, and it's pretty extraordinary what they've done with their new stadium, right? And sort of likening it to the Cowboys, who have 20 or 30% more revenue than the next highest NFL team. So if you look at what is possible sort of at the ticketing level, sponsorship is infinite in theory, right? And I think Angel City did an incredible job of really coming out with sort of mission and then putting that against like an incredible LA Hollywood-esque kind of content team where you could, in theory, create a lot of digital assets if you stand for something and you really know what you stand for and push it out across a lot of different platforms. And then, of course, so I do think facilities and then what you're putting against facilities are big ones. You're just starting to see practice facilities be sponsored, and that's something I feel like I've toured every practice facility in the country. But Jasmine Robinson and I, my partner, we always look at there isn't a market for understanding the sponsorship dollars associated with practice facilities, but there is going to be a big difference based on where you place it, how integrated it is. And then finally, probably a topic for later, our league level revenues and media rights should dramatically drive league revenues, but take some level of sophistication.
Yeah, one thing I think I want to make sure we don't lose perspective of, because we're all business people here, right? And we love to talk about more sophisticated approaches to revenue and processes and what have you. But it is a sporting product at the end of the day. And I think the investment in the facilities is very important because it drives a better product. The investment in players, really figuring out our pipeline of talent, really giving female players the right level of support to develop their game and to put together good games. So every time you go to the stadium, it feels like a top sporting event. At the end of the day, it needs to be, I think, the heart of what needs to happen in the next few years. And I want to make sure we're not core sports people. We're not on that side of the business, of the house, but it is the heart of the business.
I would probably take us, maybe building on what Kara and Carmen said, take a slightly different view. I think the answer is fan development, and then again, fan development. And I think, there's a circular nature to what happens in sports properties. There's fan interest, which drives greater media coverage, which in turn drives greater fan interest. And having been at F1 for 4 years during, I'm biased, but probably the best example of that this century from a sports property perspective, all the benefit of the work that was done during that time is now being reaped as commercial rewards. And I think, emerging and even mature sports properties make two mistakes. One is they don't really know which fan segments are the right fan segments to go after to expand the audience and how to go after those. And then two, they take the media dollar in lieu of distribution and promotion too early in the growth cycle. And I think those two mistakes are, potentially fatal in some ways for women's sports. But on the other hand, if you capture and make the right decisions there, I think that's the unlock. And, whether I'd love to know, I'm not on this side of the house anymore, but how these folks think about, is it going to be ground up kind of provincial team-based fan growth? Is it going to be through athlete celebrity? How do, women's sports capture the zeitgeist in a way that the women's Final Four does or the Women's World Cup does more often? Those are the questions, and thinking about fan segmentation and around that I think women's sports, not for 3 years, for like the next 10, needs to be priority number one.
Yeah, I really agree with what you just said, Frank. And obviously, we all sit in different seats and have different perspectives. But at Just Women's Sports, we're a media company dedicated to women's sports. And something we say a lot is what's lacking in the space today is the infrastructure. And that's both the media to just engage and grow a casual fan, but also everything that like OneTeam Partners touches, trading cards, merchandising, agencies dedicated to the women's side. There is a whole industry really built and optimized for NFL and NBA. How do we build that on the women's side? And I think we should start with NWSL and WNBA. And how do we do that? And how do we take advantage of that? Something that has come up in this conversation is purpose-driven investment and investment. And I think it's an interesting time in women's sports where we are seeing that a lot of early movers, a lot of early brands came in very intentionally. And now we're seeing brands come in just looking for an ROI. How do you guys think about that? How do you think about the evolving landscape? How do you think about showing up for these sponsors?
Are you asking about the sponsors or investors?
I guess both. Any property, any person investing in this space.
It's interesting because you asked earlier what was overhyped, and I didn't totally answer, and it's a tricky question,
I'm circling
right?
back.
But circling back, I think, look, in some sense, that is a little bit overhyped. Obviously, we're extremely thankful for institutional investors, celebrities that bring a lot of attention to the team and the properties, but it is really about what you do with that attention and how you create a great sporting product, how you develop your fans, how you bring other revenue streams and really optimize them. It's a lot about all those other priorities. So again, extremely thankful for all the attention that goes into it and all the investment that allows us to make. But let's not lose focus of it's a sporting product, it's a fan product, and it is a source of a lot of different revenues with a lot of different partners.
What was the question?
I didn't answer it. I answered the question I wanted to answer, so I think we
Kara's
lost
such
track.
a pro.
I did agree with Frank. Good point. Sponsors
said,
sponsors and ROI. Got it.
Yeah.
I just got back from Europe. I'm a little jet lagged. I think Julie and I have talked about this quite a bit. When we started Angel City, and Julie said you need to be at this dinner because they're a potential partner of ours. Like, she was always there. And actually, recently I called Julie and told her I think she's kind of like the Pope. I just have wanted to say that on stage because she was everywhere with every sponsor at every grassroots event, and it was her life and still is. And in a way, that is the authenticity on the team leadership side, but also on the investor side. Like, what are you doing at 2 a.m? How are you showing up? How do you sit, like, when you're sitting with potential sponsors? Are you getting transactional right away? What is the ROI they're looking for in the NFL versus women's sports? All of these different things. And I do think, if you sit in a room with people long enough, and sometimes it's actually like you need to sit in a room with them for 36 hours. You can tell who's like talking points and they're doing this because it's their job, and like where it's really authentically you're trying to do something different and solve something. And I mean, DoorDash became our sponsor at Angel City before we signed a single player, before we sold a single season ticket. And a lot of that was Julie and Jess and standing for something and saying we were going to deliver something. But we were talking, the market has changed, right? When we came out, Angel City was something was different than kind of anyone else because we also had a business sensibility. Now there's the great news is there's a lot of teams and leagues that can present that opportunity. But so it's really knowing, I think, who you are. And then, I think looking at, we at Monarch, it's interesting. We just actually had a Zoom on this morning, the full team, to figure out, we have sponsors come to us all the time and they want to learn the market and do something with us. And we're like, okay, what do we do with them other than introduce them to one of the teams we work with? Like, how do you actually play a role in a longer-term education? But I do think if you look at Ally, and I was listening to Andrea Brimmer talk with, Kathy, the commissioner of the WNBA recently, they'll talk about conversion. They'll talk about brand affinity, where they're up 27%, whereas everyone else in the industry is down 3%. People are actually looking for more data on the women's side than they are on the men's side. But we need to find that data and, get anecdotes around how is a direct marketing campaign converting, all these different things, because a lot of people want to put money to work, and they're just trying to figure out how, but it is still the greatest opportunity to convert people into being a lifelong fan of that brand.
I think I totally agree. I think the white space is pretty unique in sports. Sports is very cluttered from a sports marketing perspective, and we're still early enough that there's white space and ability to cut through. We're really proud of this deal we did with Aflac to do the WNBA All-Star Game check, where they basically get the winner of the skills challenge, the winner of the three-point shootout gets the same economics that the men's players get, which is like a year's salary for some women in the WNBA. Hopefully that'll change in the next CBA. We think that it will. But at any rate, that's super cut through. That was trending on Twitter. It kind of captured the imagination of the sports community more broadly. And it's harder to do that, I think, in men's because there's just so much, enthusiasm and excitement and historical brands that are attached to some of these brands that have that connectivity. So it's exciting for brands, I think, to be in women.
Totally. We've talked a little bit on this panel about needing to grow the fan base and growing and engaging the audience. How do you guys think about that from where you sit?
It's a lot of different levers, right, that are going to have to be pulled. Obviously, the digital world is a blank canvas of opportunities in terms of the ability to engage with fans and reach new people. Storytelling, which was something that came up earlier around players and teams, massive opportunity. I think that's something that actually the NCAA has done particularly well. You get to follow someone for 4 years, and you talk a lot about it in your channel. And then we shouldn't forget that this is an experiential product, and grassroots marketing is something that Angel City did amazingly well in the early years, and that should always be a huge lever, connecting with your community, meeting the youth when they're first getting into the sport, first developing affinity. There's a lot of stuff that you can do to be associated with your city and connect with fans. So it's not all about the sort of the digital space and the media, but massive opportunity on all, both digital and real world fronts.
Okay, how many people have tried to watch a women's sports team they love and have gone to go find the game and could not watch it? Raise your hand. How many? Yeah, I mean, there's so much specific work to do around having just women's sports, more podcasts, all the different coverage, the adjacency, the storytelling, but also just basic blocking and tackling. I'm on the road a lot, but I literally can almost never figure out how to watch an Angel City game when I'm on the road. And we have like an appointed family member who is to manage my logins and passwords and everything else. But you know what? I mean, it's funny. We have we have some tech folks who are season ticket holders at Angel City, which was my previous job. And one of them always talks to me about the K factor, which is like virality of kind of a product. Do they tell other people and bring them in? And he said the K factor of Angel City, but it could be the San Diego Wave, it could be Boston Legacy, it could be any team that Monarch has invested in. Anyway, like they're always bringing new fans, right? And they're always bringing new people, and then they often will convert them into season ticket holders. So I think it's simple stuff. I mean, it is the fan development. It is have an amazing in-game experience. Make it easy when you do connect to a player or a team to follow them. And then we have to do a ton more around the storytelling for individual athletes, the adjacencies, the stories. And it isn't, I mean, I agree with Frank completely. It just isn't in the near term about the media dollars. It isn't. And we get a chance to study men's leagues. It's almost like if you were to rebuild democracy now, which I'm sure nobody wants to do, but studying where we are, 80 to 90% of it's amazing. What's the 10 or 20% you would change? And for sure around the storytelling and the media rights, you would do something different right now if you were thinking in a really innovative way around how to build fandom over the next 100 years.
The only thing I'd add, that these two know this better than I do, is I think the men's sports fan cohort is me, basically. It's 40 and to 60-year-old. That is the biggest cohort of men's sports fans. The biggest cohort of women's sports fans is 18 to 34. They're growing up in a world where they've changed their media consumption behaviors, and this is one of the reasons Just Women's Sports exists and specifically is tapping into this audience, is a digital native audience. They have direct relationships with the athletes that we represent in a bigger way and have more trust and authenticity in that relationship. They're spending more time digitally, and they're digital natives. They know what bullshit looks like digitally and what's authentic. And I think, that sort of fan segmentation and the nature of the younger women's sports fan vis-a-vis the men's is relevant, I think, to this question of sort of how do you grow the fan base long term.
I totally agree, and that's something we talk a lot about at Just Women's Sports. 80% of our audience is under the age of 34, and it's almost 50-50 men, women. So we really describe our fan base as like a next-gen sports fan, and I think that's very representative of the women's sports fan. They are a next-gen sports fan, which I think is very encouraging for women's sports as a category, where men's sports is thinking about how do we get in front of that demographic. Women's sports is building with that demographic, and I think that's really encouraging. Last question for everyone. There is a surge of interest in women's sports teams and leagues. That is well known. What are some of the less obvious opportunities in women's sports that you guys are thinking about, excited about?
Well, I guess that's for me. We at Monarch really focus on teams, leagues, and rights. I would say that the rights side they're all hard to do, right? And everyone everyone has a choice now who is a team in a good market with great control owners that has facilities and is values aligned, which is what we look for. So I would say maybe less obvious, but we spend a lot of time in Europe. We spend a lot of time with men's football teams, the football that I spend time in, and leagues. And that is, it's just a less commercialized market. You have to show up for months, if not years. We've been going for years to really understand the cultural dynamics, the local dynamics, to build trust, to know how to price. I mean, we get calls all the time just, from men's teams over in Europe, just because we have perspective on when would you want to be at the highest revenue multiple, and then when would you not want to do it at all? Maybe, and it's I think it's very hard to know how to price over there and to how to do MSAs and related party transactions and align incentive structures and structure in the right way. So we spent a lot of time over there. My partner Jasmine is actually living there this month, and I just got back from there. And then I do think it also gives us perspective when you spend time with leagues and teams in across Europe and the U.S. around there are different things that are being done well in each market, but we spend less time on the emerging sports. Though I will say I think there's a great opportunity in emerging sports, and we do spend some time with all of them. I think there'll be a consolidation around a lot of these things, building consistent fan experience, those sorts of things. But I think pricing ends up being very, very important because all of these things take a lot of time, and there's possibility of going like this.
I think there are a lot of opportunities, but maybe just to call out two of them. I think one is youth, and obviously we see how much action there is around youth at all levels. And then the second one, I think taking the concept of merch one step further, thinking about different licensing opportunities. We've done some collabs with different brands that have been extremely successful, using the fact that the demographics for women's sports are, as we said, very different and very trendy, getting to streetwear and other versions that is not just sort of your classic merch is an absolutely massive opportunity where I think women's sport is particularly well positioned.
I'm with Carmen on the second one. And that, at OneTeam, we do sponsorship licensing, and then we have sort of a business building venture arm of sorts. And I think the consumer product space is really interesting. The way a jersey fits and a hat is worn is pretty much driven by male sports fans and men. And yet there's this groundswell of enthusiasm for, new fans in women's sports, and it's a fairly different kind of consumer behavior. I think, take collectibles as a fun one from my perspective. Young women have been collecting, I'll date myself, Beanie Babies and other products, and that's an ingrained and understood behavior. It's in the cultural zeitgeist right now because of a lot of the work that Fanatics and Topps and Mike Mahan and Michael Rubin have done on the men's side, and yet you're not really seeing young women's sports fans turn into collectors. What's driving women's sports collecting right now is men's sports fans who are moving into the women's category. We don't know it because we haven't seen it, but I think is there a derivative of the trading card, the collectible product that appeals to a women's sports fan that can really cut through? I think that's an exciting opportunity, and that applies across a lot of the categories that Carmen spoke to.
Frank, Carmen, Kara, thank you so much.
Thank you.